If you've ever looked at an old woman in a grocery store line, fumbling with coins, holding up the line with shaking fingers and a dazed look, you might have sighed, rolled your eyes, or glanced at your phone. But what if I told you she once ran for her life through the dead of night, with secrets stuffed in her coat and a prayer trembling in her chest? What if that woman, the one now invisible to the world, once carried truth sharp enough to shatter stone walls? Welcome, friends of Grandma's Stories. This tale might make you uncomfortable. It might rattle something you've kept quiet for decades, but that's why it must be told. So please, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, give this story a chance to breathe in more hearts, and settle in. Because today, I'm going to tell you a story not of faith, but of what hides behind its mask. My name is Martha Claiborne, and when I turned 62, my son told me I was forgetful. My daughter-in-law said I was stubborn. The kind of stubborn that gets dangerous with age. They said they were worried, that I needed peace, that I needed care. And so, one brisk March morning, they drove me up a long, winding road past the pines and stopped at a place that looked more like a retreat than a residence. A place with white columns, clipped hedges, and a brass plaque that read, "The Pines of Mercy, Rest for the Spirit." I remember thinking it sounded more like a slogan than a promise. Inside, the halls were quiet, too quiet. The air smelled of lemon polish and something else I couldn't name, like dried roses in an old casket. The nurse who welcomed me wore white, so starched it looked painful to move. Her smile stretched a little too far, like it had been glued on for years. She called me darling and sweetheart, words that left a film on my skin. She led me past other women in armchairs, all staring out windows with eyes that didn't seem to see. My room was small, clean, and utterly silent. There were no locks on the inside of the door. "You'll feel right at home soon," the nurse said, fluffing my pillow like she was preparing a guest for dinner. "No phones here, dear. It's best to focus on your healing." "My healing?" I asked. She paused, then smiled again. "You'll understand with time." That first night I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands in my lap, listening to the humming from the hallway, a soft, low sound like a refrigerator, but slower, heavier. A clock ticked, but not in my room. Somewhere far off. It ticked like it was counting something I couldn't name. In the morning, they brought me oatmeal and half a banana on a tray with a paper flower. The nurse, I think her name was Donna, watched me eat like I was a child learning to chew. After breakfast, they took me to a gathering room where a man with a clergy collar read aloud about obedience and stillness. No one looked at him. No one moved. The woman next to me whispered, "If you ask to leave, they say you're not ready." Quote. Her name was Eloise. She was blind. Her eyes were milky with age, but her voice was sharp, her words careful like footsteps on gravel. That day, she said something that stayed with me long after lights out. "They don't take care of you here. They forget you on purpose." I didn't believe her at first. Not really. It sounded too much like a ghost story you tell to scare new residents. But then I tried to call Gloria, my oldest friend since grade school. We used to write letters every week. I asked the front desk if I could mail a letter. The receptionist smiled and nodded. I handed her the envelope. A week passed. No answer. Then 2. Gloria never missed a letter. On the 3rd week, I saw her. Not through the window. Not on the phone. But right here at Pines of Mercy. She stood in the chapel doorway wearing a pale blue scarf and holding a Bible. She looked older than I remembered, more tired around the eyes, but still Gloria. Still the girl who once got us detention for hiding poetry in hymn books. I tried to call out, but one of the nurses gently pressed my shoulder down and whispered, "Let the service begin." When I turned back, Gloria was gone. Later that night, Eloise said, "She comes now and then, reads scriptures to the residents, thinks she's helping. She doesn't know the truth. Yet." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to tell Eloise she was being dramatic. But that night, a woman from room 9 didn't come to dinner. No one asked where she was. No one said her name. The next day, her room was empty, the bed made. A new patient arrived in her place. That's when I started writing this. If I disappear, if my name is brushed away like dust from a dresser, let this be proof I lived. That I saw. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there will believe me. Now, if you're still with me, if you're listening, come back for the next part. Because the real story didn't begin when I arrived at Pines of Mercy. It began when I tried to leave. The morning after I started writing, the sunlight in my room felt off. It came in thin and sideways, as if the glass itself filtered out warmth. The curtain lace, yellowed, pinned to one side, shimmered gently in a draft that never made it to my skin. I sat up slowly. Not from pain, but from instinct. At Pines of Mercy, it felt safer to move carefully. I slipped on my slippers and walked to the window. From there, I saw the same garden I'd seen the day before. Roses without scent, trimmed hedges without a leaf out of place, and not a single bird in the sky. After breakfast, another bowl of oatmeal. No banana this time. A nurse I didn't recognize escorted me to a small room labeled Wellness Evaluation. She wore no name tag, and her shoes didn't squeak like the others. Inside the room was a desk, 2 chairs, and a clipboard. Nothing else. No clock. No books. No signs of life. She motioned for me to sit and began with the kind of smile that never touches the eyes. "How are we feeling today, Miss Claiborne?" I looked at her, unsure of the rules. "I'm not sick," I said. "Just old." She scribbled something. Her pen moved like it was judging, not recording. "And have you had any unusual thoughts? Maybe worries? Disturbing memories?" "Everyone my age has memories," I answered. "And voices?" she asked casually. "Voices?" "Yes," she said, her tone honeyed. "Do you ever hear things when no one is around?" It hit me then. This wasn't a checkup. This was an inventory. They weren't treating illness. They were gathering ammunition. The more I said, the more they could use to frame the story. One day, maybe in court or to a relative, they'd say, "We tried to help her, but she was unstable." I said nothing more. I folded my hands in my lap and stared at a crack on the floor. When I returned to my room, Eloise was waiting near my door. She held her cane upright, like a walking stick for a prophet. Her milky eyes turned toward me. "They asked if you hear things, didn't they?" I nodded. "They asked me that too," she said. 30 years ago. I stopped breathing for a moment. "You've been here that long?" "I came in my 30s. Now I'm past 80. Don't waste time asking how." The hallway was still. We sat together in the sunroom where no one ever spoke unless prompted. Eloise leaned closer. "They'll test your reactions, push you with questions, then write you off as confused when you respond. Every tear, every raised voice becomes another mark on your file. You must be boring to survive here." "Invisible," I whispered. "I don't want to survive. I want to leave." Her head turned sharply. "Then stop talking like that. If they think you want to get out, they'll make sure you never do." That afternoon I saw Gloria again. She was standing in the courtyard, speaking softly to a group of residents seated in a semicircle. Her hands moved as she read from a pocket Bible. I wanted to rush out, to grab her by the shoulders, to tell her everything, but I stayed behind the window. She didn't know. She couldn't know. Or maybe she did, and had made her peace with it. Some people keep their eyes closed even after the lights come on. Back in my room, I opened the drawer beside my bed and found my journal right where I left it. I flipped past what I'd written. The pages smelled like old paper and lavender soap. I picked up my pen and wrote one line. "Today, they asked if I heard voices. I wish I did. At least then someone would be talking to me." That night I lay awake as the building settled. Pipes hissed, floors groaned, and somewhere down the hall a door clicked shut, not slammed, clicked. I knew the difference. The next morning, a new woman sat across from me at breakfast. Her name tag said Celia. She couldn't have been more than 55. Her hands trembled as she buttered a piece of toast. "First day?" I asked gently. She nodded, not meeting my eyes. "My daughter said it was temporary, just while she and her husband moved to Chicago." I smiled at her, but something in my chest tightened. That's how they always phrase it. Just for a little while. Just until we settle. Just until things calm down. But once you're here, time doesn't move the way it used to. A week turns into a season turns into years, and eventually, no one comes back for you. "Stay sharp," I said under my breath. "Write everything down." She looked confused, maybe even alarmed, but nodded slowly. I saw the same confusion I once felt. The first week was the softest trap. Later, Eloise took me aside near the old piano no one touched. "There's a place they call the quiet wing," she whispered. "Locked, soundproof. They take the ones who cry too much or argue too loud." I asked, "Why are you still out here?" Because I'm old enough not to matter, she said. And because I play blind better than they think I can hear. I had to ask. Have you ever tried to leave? I tried once, she said. They said I wandered, that I was confused, that I endangered myself. So they took away my shoes for a month. Quote, a wind stirred the trees outside the window, but the glass remained cool. That evening something changed. As I was getting ready for bed, I found my journal turned the wrong way in the drawer. Not opened, not missing, just placed back with an edge too neat, too precise. Someone had read it. I closed the drawer slowly and sat on the bed. The silence around me thickened, like a room holding its breath. I had no proof, no confrontation, just that small, quiet invasion. It told me everything I needed to know. They were watching, they were waiting, and they were already inside my story. If you've come this far, keep listening. Because what happened next wasn't in my control, but what I did with it was. There's a sound to being watched. It's not loud. It doesn't rattle or creak. It hums low and constant, like the pressure in your ears before a storm. The morning after I found my journal disturbed, that sound followed me. Through the corridors, past the dining hall, into the garden. It pressed in at the edges, unseen but undeniable. No one said a word about it, of course. No nurse hinted at curiosity. No administrator asked questions. They didn't have to. The silence did their work for them. During group activity that day, a painting session that felt more like an elementary school craft circle, I kept my hands busy while my mind traced everything I'd written. I remembered the exact phrases, the tone, the line about voices. Was that the one that tipped them off? Or was it the line about wanting to leave? Either way, I knew now that privacy was an illusion here, like choice on a pre-printed menu. After lunch, Eloise found me near the bird feeder, a place we sat most days pretending to enjoy the flutter of cardinals that never came. You feel it, don't you? She asked without preamble. I nodded. They read your pages. They know you're thinking beyond the gate. I didn't ask how she knew. She always knew. It was as if the walls whispered to her directly, bypassing sight and logic. They won't confront you. Not right away, she said. First, they'll isolate you. Rearrange your schedule. Limit contact. Has it started? You tell me, she said. And I realized I hadn't seen Celia all morning. The woman from breakfast. The one who'd trembled over toast. Her chair was empty. Her room door was closed. When I asked about her, a nurse smiled and said she was adjusting to her new medication. I felt something slide cold into the pit of my stomach. Later that evening, during chapel hour, I watched Gloria again. This time, she wasn't reading. She was folding linens in the sacristy, helping a younger volunteer stack hymnals. I approached slowly, careful not to startle her. Gloria, I said softly. She turned and smiled, but it was strained, as if she remembered me but couldn't place how. I'm sorry, it's me. Martha. The smile faltered. Claiborne, from St. Luke's High, the girl who drew daisies on her detention slips. Her hand touched her heart. Martha. My goodness. We embraced briefly. It wasn't warm. It was brittle with decades and distance. She pulled back, her face guarded. What are you doing here? I asked. I volunteer on Sundays. Help with music, meals, devotionals. It's fulfilling work. You chose to come here? I asked, too sharply. She hesitated. Of course. I wanted to scream then, to tell her what I'd seen, what I'd heard, about the locked doors, the blank stares, the whisper of missing shoes. But instead I said, Do you know anyone who's left? Her eyes clouded. Left? She asked. Returned home. Recovered. Gone back to their families. She looked over her shoulder, then back at me. This is a place of rest, Martha. Most people stay. That's not what I asked. She lowered her voice. Don't talk like that here. I took a breath. Gloria. They're watching me. She didn't reply, just turned and folded the last of the linens. That night, back in my room, I sat in the dark with the light off and the journal untouched. I couldn't write. Not now. My hands were still. My mind was loud. I thought about my son, about how his voice had hardened the day he dropped me off. The way he avoided eye contact when I asked if this was really necessary, his hand resting firmly on the steering wheel. like he'd already let go of me before I even stepped out of the car. A soft knock at the door broke the silence. I didn't answer, but the door opened anyway. It was Verna. She was the only nurse whose name I'd learned voluntarily. A younger woman, maybe in her 40s, with eyes that flicked around corners like they were reading shadows. She stepped inside, closed the door behind her, and held something in her hand. "My journal. You dropped this," she said. "I hadn't." I said nothing. She laid it on the nightstand. "You should be more careful what you write." Still, I stayed silent. She leaned closer. "Not everyone here believes in silence. Some of us are just waiting." Quote. For what? For someone to remind us why we shouldn't be afraid. She left then with no other words, and I didn't sleep that night. I sat upright until dawn, replaying her face, her voice, wondering if she was a friend or a trap, wondering if waiting meant resistance or surveillance. The next day, they changed my schedule. No more group activities, meals delivered to my room, chapel time suspended due to a supposed maintenance issue. No explanation, no apology. They were doing exactly what Eloise had warned. They were making me disappear. But not entirely. Not yet. Just enough to test the ground, to see if I'd sink without anyone noticing. At breakfast, the tray came with toast, oatmeal, and a cup of milk. No spoon. I stared at it for a long time. The missing spoon wasn't an accident. It was a message. We control what you eat. We control how you eat. We control everything. But they forgot one thing. I still had a voice. And as long as I could use it, I was not gone. Not yet. Stay with me. The silence is spreading, but so is the truth. The human mind is a strange thing. You'd think solitude would bring peace, but it doesn't. It multiplies every thought, every fear, every flicker of doubt until even the shape of your own shadow feels foreign. In that quiet stretch of days where I was quietly cut from the daily rhythm, I began to feel the outline of their planet through words, but through absence. No more communal breakfast. No more walks in the garden. No more Eloise waiting near the feeder, whispering sharp truths between the chirps of fake birds piped through hidden speakers. My meals now arrived on a tray, delivered by nurses I didn't know, with no names and fewer expressions. They didn't look me in the eye. They left as quickly as they came, as if the room itself might infect them. But I wasn't broken yet. On the third morning of this new routine, I tested the door after they left. Still unlocked, still swingable. But the halls, once filled with the soft murmur of movement, now echoed with nothing but air. I crept into the hallway, listening. No footsteps, no carts, only the ticking of a distant wall clock, each second like a drip in an empty well. I headed down the corridor, past rooms with closed doors. No sounds behind them, no radios, no television, just silence. That hallway felt longer than it had before, like it stretched away from me the more I walked. But I had a destination in mind. I needed to find Eloise. She hadn't appeared since the schedule shift. I hadn't heard her cane tap or her voice cut through the hush like it always had. That scared me more than anything. I reached her door. No nameplate. Just a number 214. I knocked once, then opened it. The room was dark, blinds drawn tight. The bed was made, untouched. On the dresser sat a small porcelain angel and a pair of reading glasses. But no Eloise, not even her cane. I stood there, letting the silence wrap around me like a shroud. They had moved her, or worse. But where? Before I could think, I heard something. Not footsteps. A hum low, mechanical, rising from under the floor. I stepped back into the hallway, pressing my palm against the wall. It vibrated faintly, like a distant engine was breathing just below. I followed the sound down the hall, past a utility door marked staff only, the kind of sign that dared you to try it. My hand found the knob and twisted, locked. I listened. No approaching steps, no alarms, just that same hum, now beneath my feet. And just above it, painted into the baseboard, was a small square panel, hardly visible unless you were looking for it. I crouched, fingers tracing its edge. It was metal, with a tiny hinge on one side and no handle. I remembered something, then something. Eloise once muttered as we fed imaginary birds. The quiet wing is beneath the chapel, not beside it. This was no chapel. This was the edge of the place beneath. I stood quickly, heart thudding in my throat. Just as I turned to walk away, a voice startled me. "You shouldn't be here." It was Verna. She stood a few feet down the hall, holding a laundry basket, pretending to be casual. "I got lost," I lied. Her eyes softened just a little. "These halls turn strangers into ghosts if you wander too far." "I'm not a stranger," I said. "No," she replied. "That's what scares them. Gwenta." She walked past me without another word, but her hand brushed mine for the briefest second, and I felt something cold and metal pressed into my palm. She didn't look back, just disappeared around the corner. In my hand, a small silver key. That night, I didn't eat. I saved the bread from my dinner tray, tucking it into my sweater like I was preparing for a journey. When the halls fell back into their midnight hush and the overhead lights dimmed to a sleepy amber, I dressed in my oldest clothes and slid the key into my pocket. I didn't leave through the front. That was too easy, too watched. Instead, I returned to that same hallway, that same staff door. The key turned with a quiet click, the kind of sound that should have echoed but somehow didn't. Inside, a narrow stairwell curled downward, disappearing into darkness. No signs, no lights. Just cold concrete walls and the scent of damp linen. I descended slowly. One step, then another. The hum grew louder, and then I saw it. A corridor, lined with doors, not rooms. Door-chevy, steel reinforced, each with a tiny slit at eye level. No windows, no names, just numbers burned into the paint. I approached the first. No sound. Then the second. A breath. Shallow. Ragged. The third. A whisper. I knelt, peering through the slit. A pair of eyes stared back wide, glassy, terrified. A woman, pale, motionless, lips chapped. She didn't speak, just blinked once. Behind me, the hum ceased. Silence again. Then a new sound: footsteps, fast and purposeful, coming down the stairs. I ran. No plan, no map, just flight. Back up the steps. Through the door. Down the hallway. I didn't stop until I reached my room and locked the door behind me. I collapsed on the bed, gasping, the key still in my hand. I had seen it now. The place beneath. The truth beneath the prayer rooms and music therapy and fresh laundered sheets. They had buried their secrets in concrete and called it mercy. And now I had proof. If you're listening, you need to understand something. What they do here is not neglect. It is deliberate. It is structured. It wears the mask of care and speaks in the voice of compassion, but it is neither. They call it rest. I call it erasure. And I am not done speaking. Sleep didn't come that night. Not even in pieces. My body trembled long after I locked the door and slid the chair beneath the knob, though I knew deep down it wouldn't stop them if they truly wanted to enter. The kind of exhaustion that follows fear is different from tiredness. It settles behind the eyes, in the spine. It makes every breath feel borrowed. By morning, my face in the mirror looked unfamiliar. The lines had grown deeper overnight. Or maybe they were just clearer now, carved in sharp relief by truth. And once you've seen what's behind the curtain, you can't unsee it. You carry it with you in your voice, your shoulders, your silence. When breakfast arrived, I let the nurse place the tray on my nightstand. I didn't look at her, and she didn't look at me. But this time there was a spoon. That small, deliberate act chilled me more than the missing one had. It meant they knew I knew, and they were choosing to pretend otherwise for now. I waited until she left before reaching for the journal. The words came like a slow leak, cautious and untrusting. I wrote about the hallway below, the woman behind the steel door, the weight in her stare. I didn't name Verna. I wasn't that reckless. But I described the key, and what it opened. When I lifted my pen, I looked down at the pages and realized something strange. My handwriting had changed. It was smaller, tighter, like I was folding myself into each letter. Later that afternoon, as the sun cast long pale lines across the floor, I saw a shadow pause outside my room. Not footsteps, just stillness. Then a knock. Not sharp, not polite, just present. I approached slowly. "Who is it?" "It's me, Verna." I opened the door only a crack. Her face looked drawn, eyes darker than before. "I only have a moment," she said. They did a sweep of your room yesterday. Quite. I glanced back at the journal lying beneath my pillow. I moved nothing, she continued. But someone else might. Keep it somewhere different each night. Where's Eloise? Her expression broke. Transferred. To where? They never say. They just list it as a move to long-term care. But we both know what that means. I did. I'd seen it. She lowered her voice. They're preparing for inspection. What kind? State level. Licensing review. Happens every few years. When it does, they bleach the lies until they sparkle. I felt a pulse of heat rise through my chest. We have to act before then. She nodded once. But not alone. And then she pressed something into my palm. A torn page, folded twice. I waited until she left to open it. Inside, a name, an address, and a note scribbled in slanted handwriting. Gloria can be trusted. Meet her Sunday during choir hour. East hallway exit. Gloria. I stared at the paper, my throat tightening. Could I believe it? Could I trust her again? She had seemed so removed, so unwilling to see. But maybe that was her cover. Maybe it was mine she was waiting for. The next 3 days moved like syrup. Everything slowed. Even time. They returned me to the daily schedule, but nothing felt normal. Every interaction was measured. Smiles too wide, greetings too rehearsed. As if the entire building were reciting lines in a play no one wanted to perform. I saw Celia once. Just a glimpse. Her eyes met mine across the dining hall. But she didn't wave. She didn't smile. She stared like someone looking through a window from the other side of a locked house. Then she turned away. I waited. Waited for Sunday. Waited as they paraded us into the chapel for hymns. Waited while the piano played too slow, too sweet, and too hollow to stir anything real. I kept my hands folded and my head down until the final amen, then slipped out during the shuffling of walkers and shushing of coughs. The east hallway wasn't used often. It smelled of old paint and lemon oil. I walked until I reached the door marked staff access only. It had a push bar, no alarm. I pressed. It opened with a sigh. Outside, the air felt real. Not filtered, not staged. Real air. Crisp and dry, laced with pine and the soft decay of leaves. The wind lifted my hair. I hadn't realized how much I missed the sky. Then I saw her. Gloria stood near the side entrance in a gray coat, her Bible pressed to her chest. She looked older now than she had even a week before. Tired, wary but awake. I didn't know, she said before I could speak. Not until Verna showed me what you wrote. I swallowed. You believed it? I did more than that. I started watching, and once you see the patterns it all unravels. We stood together for a long moment. I want to help, she said. But I don't know how. We need evidence, I told her. The inspection's coming. If we can find someone outside who'll listen press, maybe a lawyer, we can get them inside while the show's still running. Her eyes flickered. I know someone. A man from our church. He used to work in elder law. He might still have connections. I need his name. And I need him to come here pretending to be a visitor. Nothing official. Just observing. She nodded. I'll make the call tonight. Before we parted, she reached into her coat and handed me a small envelope. Verna thought you might need this. Inside was a photo. Black and white. Grainy. A group of women standing in front of the pines, maybe 30 years ago. One of them was Eloise. Younger, but unmistakable. On the back, scribbled in blue ink, "Don't forget who was here." I held the picture like it might burn through my skin. A record. A name. A face. Proof. That night, I didn't sleep again. Not from fear this time, but anticipation. We were no longer alone. A crack had opened, and I intended to pry it wide enough for the world to see. The next morning began like all the others, but something in the air had shifted. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't howl or thunder. It was quiet, the kind of stillness that settles before the world tips ever so slightly toward change. A hush with weight, like the room itself was waiting. Breakfast came with orange slices. I hadn't seen fruit in days. The toast was warm, the butter real. My tea had honey instead of powder. It was the first time in weeks that something tasted like home. They were preparing. I watched the hallway from the sliver of light beneath my door. Footsteps came and went with unfamiliar rhythm. More shoes, More voices. A new scent wafted through the air cleaner, crisper, like someone had opened every window in the building, though I knew they hadn't. Inspection week had begun. Later that day, Gloria slipped into my room during laundry collection. She moved with practiced ease, her presence barely a breeze. "He's coming Wednesday," she whispered. "Name's Daniel Myers. Tall, glasses, slow walk. He'll ask for a tour under the pretense of considering the facility for his aunt. Will they let him in? They always let prospects in. New income, fresh reputation. He'll wear a clergy pin. No one questions God's people here." She placed a small envelope on my nightstand. Inside is a list. Residents who've disappeared in the last year. I found it in the chaplain's old filing drawer. Half the names have no discharge record. The rest were labeled relocated. No forwarding addresses. No contact family. Does it have Eloise's name? She hesitated. Yes. Marked as transferred to a hospice in Asheville. But that facility closed last year. I felt the weight of the envelope like a stone in my chest. "We'll need to be ready," I said. "He has to see the real Pines, not the polished one they show outsiders." She nodded. "Leave that to Verna." That night, I went for a walk through the garden at dusk. The wind had cooled. The sky was the color of bruised lavender. Pines stretched tall like sentinels, unmoving, watching. From the edge of the path, I spotted Celia seated alone on a bench near the fountain. Her hands rested in her lap, but she wasn't reading or praying. She was simply waiting. I sat beside her without speaking. After a while, she said, "I saw you." I turned to her. "You went downstairs, didn't you?" "To the hallway." I nodded slowly. "They took me there once. After I refused the pills for a week. I kept saying I wasn't sick, that I wanted my daughter. They said I was unsettled." Her voice faltered. "They kept me there for 3 nights. No light, no sound, no food, just water. When they brought me back up, everything tasted like rust." "Why haven't you spoken?" I asked. "Because they watch," she said. "And because once you've been to the place beneath, part of you never comes back up." I took her hand. It was cold but firm. "Someone's coming," I said. "Someone from the outside. A man who might be able to help. But he needs to hear it from you too." Her eyes found mine. "Will he believe me?" "I don't know," I answered. "But I'll be standing beside you when you tell him." Tuesday passed slowly. Too slowly. The staff moved with rehearsed cheerfulness. There were fresh flowers in the vases, new throw blankets on the chairs, jazz music in the lounge. Every corridor had been scrubbed. Even the residents were touched up, hair combed, cheeks powdered, wheelchairs aligned in perfect rows. But beneath it all, the hush remained. The kind you only notice when you've lived inside it long enough to feel its contours. That night, Verna knocked once, then entered. She carried a clipboard. "They'll bring him in through the west wing at 10 sharp, she said. "He'll be paired with Denise, the assistant director. You have less than 30 minutes to get his attention." Closed. I stood, heart beginning to pound. "And if I fail? Then they'll know you tried," she said softly. She turned to leave, then stopped. "I need you to understand something, Martha. If this works, if someone finally listens, it might cost you. There will be no turning back. I already lost everything," I said. "This is all I have left." The next morning I dressed with care. Not out of vanity, but intention. A clean blouse. The soft blue cardigan Gloria had given me years ago, worn thin at the elbows. I sat near the atrium with a crossword I didn't plan to complete, waiting for the moment. When the man arrived, I knew it was him. He walked slowly, deliberate but not hesitant. He wore a charcoal suit, a dark tie, and glasses that slid a little down his nose. Behind him trailed Denise, all warmth and clipped heels. They made the usual circuit sunroom, dining hall, chapel. As they entered the atrium, our eyes met. I gave a faint nod, subtle but sure. He paused ever so slightly. "Would you like to meet one of our longtime residents?" Denise chirped. "Please," he said, adjusting his glasses. He approached. "May join you? Only if you're willing to hear a truth not found in brochures." He blinked, then smiled faintly. "Try me." We spoke in riddles at first, the kind only someone looking for meaning would understand. I told him about birds that never sang, hallways that hummed, journals that moved when no one touched them. He listened. When Denise stepped away to take a call, I leaned closer. "There's a door near the east wing," I said. Locked. Beneath it, a corridor with numbered cells. I've seen it. So have others. They call it the quiet wing. It's anything but quiet. Are you prepared to testify? He asked. Yes. To be named? If it will bring the others into light, yes. He rose. Then let's begin. Before he left, he touched my shoulder lightly. You are not forgotten. And for the first time in months, I believed it. That evening, Verna found me in the hallway, the soft glow of overhead lights blurring the corners. You did it, she whispered. I nodded, but something in me remained still. We've opened the door, I said. But what waits on the other side, she replied, isn't just justice. It's everything they've tried to bury. Quote. And I knew then that exposure wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. When the door opens, even just a crack, it doesn't take long for the air to shift. Word spreads in places you can't measure, in glances exchanged across dining halls, in brief nods during morning walks, in silence that feels heavier than usual. By the next day, something unspoken had begun to ripple through Pines of Mercy, and though no one said it out loud, we all felt it. Someone had finally listened. But with that sliver of hope came something else: fear, the kind that creeps along your spine when light touches a place that was never meant to be seen. The staff didn't speak of the visit, but they moved differently now. Slower, tighter, like the walls themselves were closing in. By Thursday, Denise had vanished from the schedule. No more sharp heels clicking across the tile. No more bright laughter during inspections. When I asked one of the nurses where she'd gone, she smiled too quickly and said she was attending to family matters. Quote, Verna met me in the linen closet just before lunch. We didn't speak until the door was shut behind us, the scent of bleach thick in the air. He's filed a preliminary report, she said. Enough to trigger a formal review. They're rattled. Good, I whispered. They're also watching. Closely, and not just you. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded paper. It was a copy of the list Gloria had given me, except this one had names highlighted, half a dozen circled in red ink. Next to each the word, at risk. These are the ones they might move, Verna said. To keep them quiet. Maybe even before the state returns. I scanned the names. Celia's was there. So was Joanna, a gentlewoman who crocheted angels in the rec room, and Harriet, who used to hum lullabies under her breath when the lights dimmed. How soon? Could be any day. We need to move fast. It wasn't just about speaking anymore. It was about protecting those who couldn't speak at all. That night, under the cover of evening hymnals and sleepy meds, Gloria arranged for Daniel to call a local journalist, someone he trusted. Not a headline hunter, but a quiet reporter known for careful stories and a long memory. The kind who knew how to wait and how to listen. Her name was Nora. I didn't meet her that night, but I imagined her. A woman with worn boots and notebooks stained by coffee rings, the type who saw beyond manicured lawns and charity plaques. She's agreed to come, Gloria said. Tomorrow, as a family friend. Of who? Mine, she smiled faintly. She baptized my niece. We have a history. The next morning, the sky cracked open with the promise of rain. Not a storm, just the slow, heavy kind that turns everything gray and reflective. It suited the mood of the day. The corridors were quiet, but not with peace. More like anticipation, as if every step was being weighed. I watched the front entrance from the library window. At exactly 9:10, a woman in a green coat stepped through the gate. Her gait was purposeful, her bag slung crosswise across her body. She signed in at the desk, spoke briefly with the receptionist, and disappeared down the hallway. Nora. An hour passed before Gloria found me. She wants to see you, Verna arranged it. We met in the art room unused that morning, the scent of dried paint lingering in the air. Nora was standing near the far wall, studying a half-finished painting left behind by Joanna. It was a field, wild and unkempt, with a single window in the middle of the canvas, as though a house had vanished and only its eye remained. She said this was a memory, Nora murmured without turning. The house she was born in burned down when she was 6. All she remembered was the window. I stepped forward. She hasn't painted in days. Nora turned, and I saw it then. The depth, the weight behind her eyes. She didn't carry a recorder, didn't even hold a notepad, just watched me like a lighthouse, quiet, steady, always lit. Tell me, she said. So I did. I told her about the hallway beneath the chapel, about the woman with hollow eyes, about missing names, changed schedules, silent punishments. I told her how we learned to fear kindness, how we spoke in riddles to avoid being recorded as unstable. I told her about Eloise, about the hum in the walls, about the spoon that disappeared. She listened without flinching. When I finished, she nodded once. "You're not the first place like this I've seen," she said softly. "But you're the first where someone found a way to speak while still inside. What happens now?" "I write," she said, quietly, carefully, "and when I'm ready to publish I'll call." As she turned to leave, she paused at the door. "They may try to isolate you," she said. "They may even remove you. If that happens, remember this. Someone heard you, and someone is coming." I held on to those words like a candle in a cave, but I knew better than to think the others would wait quietly. That afternoon, Celia found me again. "They told me I was going to a new facility," she whispered. "That it's nicer, more peaceful, but they won't tell me where. They're trying to move you," I said. "We have to stop it." She looked at me, eyes wide. "How?" "We hide you." The plan was risky, but risk was all we had left. That night, Verna agreed to leave the supply room open for 30 minutes, just long enough for Celia to slip in and stay hidden until morning. We packed her food, water, and a wool blanket. Gloria brought her an old rosary. "Not for prayer," she said, "but to hold on to something." Celia didn't cry. She simply looked at us like a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to remember. As the hallway darkened, I pressed her hand once. "We'll come for you," I promised. She nodded and stepped into the shadows. That night, thunder finally broke overhead, low and slow like the warning growl of something ancient. And as the walls shuddered with wind, I stared at the ceiling and thought of all the women still locked away behind steel doors and empty records. And I whispered to the dark, "Not one more name will disappear without being seen. Not one more voice will be silenced without an echo." By morning, the storm had moved on, but its shadow remained. The pines outside stood dripping and motionless, as though they too were waiting. Inside, the air was sharp with the scent of bleach and fear. Something had shifted during the night, and even the walls seemed to hold their breath. Celia was still hidden in the supply room. I passed it twice during the early hours, walking slowly, pretending to look for a misplaced sweater. From the outside it looked unchanged, a closed door, a mop bucket nearby. But I knew what it held: hope, trembling and silent, bundled beneath shelves of folded linen. Breakfast was unusually quiet. The other residents picked at their trays with a kind of distracted grace, as though their minds had drifted somewhere far away. I searched each face, counting silently. Joanna, Harriet, Marie, all still here, for now. I met Gloria in the greenhouse after mid-morning meds, under the pretense of helping with the orchids. We spoke in whispers, our fingers busy with pots and soil. "She made it through the night," Gloria said. Verna checked on her twice. "Good. What about the list?" I gave it to Nora before she left. She promised to cross-check with her own records. I nodded, wiping my hands on my apron. "Do you think we've bought enough time?" "I think we've started a fire," Gloria said. "Now we see who tries to stamp it out." Later that day, Verna approached me during music hour. The piano played softly in the corner, but no one listened. She leaned close, voice low. "They're suspicious. They've noticed the absence. They'll start looking?" "Not yet." I told them Celia had a fall and was in isolation as a precaution. "It bought us one night. Maybe two." I turned to her. "That may be all we need." That evening, Daniel returned. He wasn't scheduled. He didn't sign in. He came in through the staff gate under the pretense of delivering donated books. But it wasn't the novels tucked under his arm that mattered. It was the small recorder hidden in the spine of a fake volume titled Quiet Paths to Peace. We met in the art room again, under dim lights and the faint smell of turpentine. "There's interest," he said. "The state has opened a file, and Nora's piece when it drops will make it impossible for them to ignore." "When?" I asked. 2 days. Sunday. Front page. My breath caught. "Will that be enough?" "It's a start," he said. "But we need one more thing. Someone from inside. A first-hand account, recorded, with names and dates." I nodded. "I'll do it." He hesitated. "If you speak, they'll know it was you." They may retaliate. They already have, I said. And I'm still standing. He handed me the book. Speak your truth. Clearly. Simply. No anger. Just facts. I took it from him, my hands steady. That night, while the building slumbered under pills and routine, I sat in my chair by the window and pressed the hidden button inside the book's cover. The red light blinked once, then disappeared, and I began. I spoke of the rooms below, of the locked doors, of the women who vanished from breakfast and never returned, of the silence disguised as care, and the compliance confused for consent. I said their names: Eloise, Celia, Joanna. I described the fear in their eyes, the bruises on their wrists, the way they flinched at kindness. I spoke of the list, of the records erased. I told them how we learned to swallow our voices, how we memorized the cracks in the ceiling because we weren't allowed to look each other in the eye, and I ended with a sentence I hadn't planned, but that came from a place deeper than memory. I am not here because I am ill. I am here because someone wanted me quiet. But silence is not the same as peace. The next morning, I tucked the book beneath my mattress and carried on as if nothing had changed. But inside, something had. Around mid-morning, a code was called over the intercom. Not a voice, just a set of tones. 3 rising, 2 falling. I hadn't heard it before. Neither had most of us. But Verna's face turned pale when she heard it. They're doing a sweep, she said, looking for discrepancies. My pulse quickened. Celia? They'll start there. Quote. We moved quickly, slipping down the corridor, avoiding the eyes of staff. Verna unlocked the supply room, and we entered. Celia was sitting on a folded blanket, pale but alert. They're coming, Verna said. We have minutes. I turned to Celia. Are you ready? She stood slowly. I've been ready since they took my name off the door. Together, we led her down the back hallway, through the linen tunnel, and into a side office used for broken wheelchairs. It had a closet, barely large enough to stand in. But it was dry, and out of view. We'll bring food, Verna said. Just until Sunday. Celia nodded. I can wait. We closed the door just as the footsteps approached. 2 nurses walked past us without a word, their eyes sweeping the hallway, clipboards in hand. I returned to the lounge, took up my knitting, pretended. The rest of the day passed in a strange sort of suspension, as if the building itself was waiting to exhale. We moved through our routines like dancers in a slow rehearsal, each step practiced, each word chosen. By evening, the tension had wrapped around every corner like a fog. But beneath it, in the smallest corners, I saw something else. Eyes meeting mine with recognition, shoulders squared, a nod here, a smile there. Not all of us were asleep. And come Sunday, we would wake the rest. Sunday came cloaked in a strange kind of calm. The wind had softened overnight, and the sky glowed with a wintry stillness that usually signals something is about to break. It was the kind of morning where nothing made noise unless you listened for it: the shuffle of slippers on tile, the gentle clink of teacups, the near inaudible sound of breath held too long. I dressed slowly, hands steady, heart quiet. My blouse was pressed, my cardigan neat. A small act of defiance, perhaps, but there was something sacred in still choosing how to present yourself when the world has tried to erase you. When I reached the common room, it was unusually full. Everyone had been gathered early, an unscheduled devotional placed just after breakfast. Reverend Sykes himself stood near the fireplace, tall and soft-spoken, with the same look he wore every time something behind the curtain needed distraction. He began to speak, voice measured, smooth as polished wood. There's been concern, he said, about the safety and well-being of some of our more delicate residents. Rumors, mostly. Whispers. And you all know how dangerous whispers can be. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. They create worry where there should be rest, doubt where there should be trust. I felt gloria skift besi deme. What we need now, the Reverend continued, is unity, a return to gratitude. Gratitude for the peace we offer here. The care. The prayer. The room stayed still, faces turned toward him but expressions unreadable. Then, a small voice from the back spoke. What about Celia? Ahushfel. It was Joanna. She stood slowly, her cane trembling slightly in her hand, but her voice was clear. She wasn't delicate. She was afraid. And now she's gone. Gasps flickered around the room like sparks. The Reverend's smile faltered. We've addressed her transfer. She didn't transfer, Joanna interrupted. She hid, and you know why. Denial hovered on his lips, but he didn't speak it. Instead, he looked to the nurses at the edge of the room. One of them moved toward Joanna, hand extended. But then another voice rose. She told me she heard screams. Harriet this time. Quiet, wide-eyed Harriet. And I saw the locks, added Marie, her voice shaking. It rippled like wind across dry grass, dozens of women, one after another, speaking fragments of things they were never supposed to remember. A bruise here, a missing roommate, a nurse who whispered threats during bedtime checks. Nothing shouted, just truth, delivered like the soft toll of a distant bell. And in the middle of it all, I stood up. This is not a place of mercy, I said. It is a place of quiet disappearance, and we are done being quiet. Quote. The Reverend looked at me, expression unreadable. But the stillness around him had changed. He was no longer the center of the room. We were. He left without finishing his sermon. That afternoon, the story broke. Nora's article appeared on the front page of the Sunday Herald. It wasn't sensational. It wasn't angry. It was precise, measured, and devastating. The headline read, "Behind the Pine's Silent System of Suffering." Inside, the story unfolded in paragraphs that laid bare the hidden structure. Manipulated files, illegal detentions, falsified discharge records, sedatives administered without consent. There were quotes mine, Celia's, even one from Eloise, pulled from a letter she'd written to a cousin before disappearing. And there was the photo, the one of Eloise, standing in front of the pines decades ago, smiling in a way that made my chest ache. Her name was printed in bold below the image. That evening, phones rang constantly in the administration wing. Cars arrived in the lot. People in suits stepped through the front doors, not smiling, not speaking. An investigator met privately with staff. Doors were closed, files locked. But the air had changed. On Vefertit. Verna passed me in the hall, her face unreadable. They're freezing internal records, she said, trying to cover the trail. We have ours, I replied. And now so does the state. Quote, do you know what you did today? I didn't do it alone. She paused. No, but you lit the match. That night, I returned to my room and found the fake book on my pillow. Inside, a note. You have been heard. And there is more to come. Signed, DM. I tucked it back inside the spine and placed it on the shelf. In the hallway, I passed Harriet sitting near the window. Do you think they'll shut it down? She asked, barely above a whisper. I think they'll try to rename it first, I said. Change the curtains, paint the walls. But it won't matter, she said, her voice firming. Because we'll still remember. And that was it, wasn't it? The truth hadn't just been spoken, it had been witnessed. And now, even if they scrubbed every record, repaved every path, and replaced every nurse, they couldn't take back what we had reclaimed. Ourselves. That night, we gathered in the chapel not for prayer, but for presence. No staff. No readings. Just us, in the pews, eyes meeting, hands brushing, breath shared. We sat in the quiet, no longer afraid of it. We had learned how to fill silence with something stronger than sound, with story, with resistance. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself close my eyes and rest. The quiet that settled over Pines of Mercy after the article wasn't the same kind of silence we'd grown used to. It wasn't the heavy hush that smothered truth or the careful stillness of watching eyes. This silence had breath in idolive, uncertain, waiting. Monday dawned gray and cool. The air smelled faintly of wet pine and old paper. I sat by the window with my tea, watching the road outside. There were more cars in the lot than usual. Black sedans with government plates. A van marked Health and Human Services. Strangers with clipboards moved between buildings, whispering to one another, faces drawn with focus. Something was beginning. I heard my name before I saw the man who spoke it. He stood at the doorway to the common room, tall, with tired eyes and a kind mouth. Martha Claiborne? I nodded. My name's Eric Samuels, state investigator. Would you have a moment? I followed him down the corridor to the small conference room near the front lobby. It was a space usually reserved for visiting family members. I hadn't seen it used in over a year. He offered me the chair closest to the window. I sat carefully, folding my hands in my lap. I've read the article, he began. And I've heard your name from a number of sources. What I'd like is to hear it directly from you. What happened here? I took a deep breath and told him. Not just the facts, though I gave those, the names, the dates, the routines, but also the weight of it, the cold of the basement stairs, the eyes behind the door, the feeling of erasure creeping in with each silent day. He listened without writing anything down, just watched me. At the end, he said softly, "We've interviewed 3 staff members already. 2 have resigned. The 3rd has asked for protection under whistleblower status." "Verna?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "I'm not at liberty to confirm names, but yes." Quote. Relief washed through me in a strange way, more quiet than joy, more solid than hope. He leaned forward. "We're moving fast. By the end of the week, the facility will be placed under temporary state management while we begin formal proceedings. In the meantime, we'll need you to stay. You're central to this case." "I'm not going anywhere," I said. As I left the room, I passed Gloria in the hallway. Her eyes caught mine, and I gave a small nod. She understood. The rest of the day moved in odd rhythm. Residents murmured quietly, watching the new faces float by in their pressed suits and sensible shoes. Some of us were called one by one into private meetings. Others were left alone, for now. But no one felt forgotten anymore. In the early afternoon, I visited Celia. She had been moved back to her room 2 days earlier, after the heat had settled. Now, she sat upright in bed, a crocheted shawl around her shoulders, her eyes clearer than I'd ever seen them. "They told me I could leave soon," she said. "Go to a real place, one where people smile because they want to." I smiled. "You deserve that. So do you." We sat in silence for a moment. Then she reached for a small box beside her bed and handed it to me. "Eloise gave me this before she was taken. She said to give it to you when it was safe." I opened it carefully. Inside was a single cassette tape wrapped in tissue paper. No label, no handwriting, just a piece of string tied neatly around it. "She told me once," Celia whispered, "that her voice had once mattered, that she wanted it to matter again." That night, I found an old tape player in the activity closet. I brought it to my room, closed the door, and pressed play. Eloise's voice filled the room, soft and weathered, but sure. She spoke of her arrival at the Pines in 1967. She had come willingly, at first told it was a place for rest after a breakdown. What followed was years of silence, of being labeled difficult, of being moved from one wing to another until her name became a cautionary tale. She described the early days of the basement wing, when it was still being built, how she helped clean the concrete dust from the stairs, how she later watched others disappear down them. She ended with this: "If someone ever hears this, let them know. I was real. I was here." And I waited. I waited for someone to light a fire. Don't let it go out. I listened to the tape 3 times before placing it back in the box. The next morning I gave it to Daniel. He said nothing as I handed it over, just nodded with a weight in his expression that didn't need words. Words spread slowly. Not everyone understood the full picture, but something in the air told them enough. The staff grew quieter. Some stopped showing up altogether. Others stood off to the side, as if unsure whether they still belonged. By Thursday, the Reverend had vanished. No farewell, no sermon, just an empty office and a missing nameplate. In the chapel we gathered without anyone calling us, dozens of us, some in chairs, some on foot, a few still unsure why they had come. I stepped to the front. "There's no service today," I said, "but I think we all need to speak." One by one, women rose. Marie spoke of her sister, who died here but was listed as discharged. Joanna read a letter she'd written years ago but never mailed. Harriet sang a lullaby she remembered from her mother, her voice shaking with memory. It wasn't a formal reckoning. It wasn't planned. It was more powerful because of that. Later that evening, Gloria found me in the greenhouse. The orchids were blooming again, small, delicate things that had spent months surviving. "They're saying you started this," she said. "I didn't. I just refused to stay quiet." "Same thing." She placed her hand on mine. "They're going to rename this place." I looked at her. "They can change the signs," I said, "but we'll always know what it was." She nodded. "And we'll tell it right." That night, I fell asleep without fear. No chair wedged under the door. No journal hidden in my drawer. Just breath, steady and full. Because something had ended. And something else had just begun. A week later, the brass letters that once spelled Pines of Mercy were gone from the front gate, taken down quietly, early in the morning before most residents were awake. No ceremony, no explanation. Just a gap on the wall where a name used to be. We watched it disappear from the library window. Celia stood beside me, her posture straighter than I'd seen in months. "It's strange," she said, "that a name could weigh so much and still vanish like dust." "They always do," I replied, "but the weight stays." The building remained the same, at least on the outside stucco walls, shuttered windows, the familiar winding path through the trimmed hedges. But something underneath had shifted in ways you could feel. The nurses who remained moved without the practiced efficiency of secrecy. The new ones, sent by the state, still wore the wrong shoes too bright, too clean, but they didn't look through us. They asked questions, offered second helpings, sat in silence without unease. Small signs, but we noticed. On Thursday, I received a letter. Not typed, handwritten. It arrived in a plain envelope, the kind used for utility bills or lost birthday cards. Inside were just a few lines. "Miss Claiborne, I read about you, about all of you. My mother was at Pines in the 1980s. She died here. I never got answers. Thank you for speaking. You've given me more than closure, you've given her a name again. J.A." I held the paper in my hands for a long time before reading it aloud to Gloria. Her eyes filled with something neither sadness nor joy, but something deeper, a kind of knowing. "They're starting to come forward," she said. "Not just the living," I whispered. "The forgotten, too." The next morning Daniel returned. We met in the garden, where the frost had finally loosened its grip. Daffodils pushed through the soil at the base of the fence. They looked misplaced, like hope often does when it arrives too early. "We've secured testimony from 5 former staff," Daniel said. "We're assembling a timeline. Will it be enough?" He looked up. "Yes. And no. It'll expose this place. Possibly bring charges. But the system what allowed this to happen that's rooted deep. This is one tree in a forest." I nodded slowly. "Then we start cutting." He handed me a folder. Inside were transcripts, pages and pages of names. Women who had passed through this building over 4 decades, some marked deceased, others transferred. Many just marked MIA. At the bottom, a signature, compiled by Sister Constance. I froze. "She's alive?" I asked. Breath caught mid-sentence. "Was," Daniel said. "She passed 2 years ago, but her records survived. We found them through an anonymous tip." My chest tightened. I remembered Hyrtle. Spare. Always moving like her thoughts were elsewhere. She had once helped hide a girl from punishment. That girl had been me. "She documented everything," he said. "They moved her to a convent in another state, kept her under watch. But she kept writing." I ran my fingers over her name. "Constance. Steady. True. She didn't stay silent," I said. "No," Daniel agreed. "And neither did you." That night I returned to the chapel. No one had held a service there in weeks, but the doors remained unlocked. The candles had all melted down to nubs, and the hymnals were dusty, their spines beginning to peel. Still, the light through the stained glass glowed soft and forgiving. I sat in the 3rd pew, where Eloise once used to hum during prayer, and I spoke, aloud, to no one in particular. "Thank you, Constance, for keeping record, for knowing this mattered, for planting something you never lived to see bloom." Outside, the wind stirred, not harsh, not biting, just enough to rustle the ivy along the windows. The next day, something unexpected happened. A van arrived. Pale blue, marked Rest Haven Recovery. Inside, 3 women stepped out. Older, careful in their movements, eyes darting. One of them clutched a bag against her chest like a shield. They were new arrivals. Transfers. But not prisoners, not silenced. They were survivors from another facility undergoing investigation. The state had chosen Pinese as it now existed to house them temporarily, until something more permanent could be arranged. When they entered the dining hall, every conversation stopped. And then, slowly, we stood. One by one. Not with applause, not with noise. Just presence. Welcome. The first woman, her name was Judith, began to cry. Not from grief. From relief. Later, Gloria turned to me, her voice steady. This place was once a cage, now it's becoming shelter. I shook my head. Not yet. But maybe a doorway. That afternoon, I took a walk through the back corridor, where the walls still bore faint signs of their past. A scratch in the paint, a discolored tile, the memory of too many whispered nights. Near the staff closet I paused. The door that once led to the basement wing was now locked with a chain. Not hidden, not erased, just closed, with a sign hanging loosely from a nail above it. Restricted, under review. I reached out and traced my fingers across the wood. Not as a goodbye, but as a witness. And I whispered the names I remembered. Eloise, Celia, Joanna, Harriet, Marie, Gloria, my own, and so many more. We were still here, still standing, still speaking. And now, they were listening. They called it a transitional period. That was the phrase the state used in every document, in every update taped to the bulletin board near the mailroom. Transitional. A word meant to sound clean, clinical, hopeful. But what it really meant was, everything is changing, and no one knows what comes next. The halls felt different, like someone had rearranged the gravity. Familiar rooms echoed in new ways. Some residents smiled more, laughed without looking over their shoulders. Others kept their heads down, unsure whether the new quiet was safety or a trap waiting to snap shut again. Gloria and I spent our afternoons in the greenhouse now. The orchids were thriving, and someone had started lavender in the far corner. The scent was strong, sharp, alive. Sometimes we just sat, neither of us saying anything, letting the warmth and silence do their own kind of healing. One day, while trimming a row of spider plants, Gloria said softly, "They want us to give interviews, television, a panel, maybe even a hearing." I didn't answer right away. I just ran my fingers through the edge of a leaf, feeling its texture. "They want me to testify too," she added. "About what I saw, what I chose not to see." I finally looked up. "You helped. That matters more." Her lips curved faintly. But so did my silence back then. The truth of it hung between us, but without anger. She went on. "I think the world needs more than just our stories now. It needs to understand how it all looked so normal. How easy it is to not ask questions when the answers might ruin your peace." I nodded. "Then we'll tell that part too." 2 days later, Daniel returned, but this time he wasn't alone. With him came 2 young women and an older man with a camera slung over his shoulder. Their faces were polite, but their eyes searched absorbing details, measuring silence, watching every movement with the hunger of those who've seen enough injustice to know it wears many faces. We met in the library, the only room that hadn't been redecorated yet. The wallpaper still curled at the corners, and the radiator ticked with age. Gloria spoke first. Her voice was calm, measured, but full of gravity. She told them how she arrived believing she was helping, how she was praised for her compassion while women disappeared behind locked doors just steps away. I followed. I talked about the days with no name, about the whispers, about the steel beneath the floor and the hum in the walls. I gave them names, places, patterns. But I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said what happened, in full sentences, as though I were describing the weather. When I finished, the cameraman lowered his lens. "That was the most honest thing I've ever recorded," he said quietly. Later that night, I sat by the window and wrote in my journal, not for evidence, not for memory, but for myself. I wrote, "What happens when the truth is finally heard? Does the world tilt? Does time catch up? Or does healing come like winter thaw, quiet, slow, barely noticed until one morning, you step outside and the air smells like beginning?" The next morning, a bus arrived. It brought 3 women from another facility, one recently shut down, the others under investigation. They were escorted by aides who spoke gently, who carried no clipboards, who didn't glance at their watches every 10 seconds. The women were cautious. One clutched a stuffed bear against her chest. Another kept her gaze on the ground. The third looked directly at me as she entered the building, tired eyes, bruised but not broken. She didn't say hello, but she nodded, just once. I nodded back. By that afternoon, word came down from the state. Pines would not be reopened as a private institution. The building would be converted into a transitional center for women recovering from institutional trauma. Therapy would be provided, education too, legal assistance, counseling. And the name Pines of Mercy would not return. "We want something new," the announcement read, but grounded in truth. The residents voted. Suggestions were collected in a cardboard box by the chapel. On Friday, the new name was painted on the front sign. Eloise House. Simple. Fitting. A name chosen not from legacy, but from remembrance. I visited the basement wing that afternoon. The chain had been removed, and the state had cleared the space. The walls were scraped clean, the air aired out. It no longer smelled of dampness, but of paint and possibility. They would turn it into classrooms. A place to begin again. I stood at the base of the stairs for a long time, running my fingers along the handrail. I whispered, "We're still here." And for once, the walls did not whisper back. In the days that followed, something remarkable began. Letters arrived from all over, sisters, daughters, nieces, strangers. Some sent donations, others sent poems. One child sent a drawing of an old woman standing in front of a house made of flowers. She labeled it, "Safe Now." Gloria started a writing group. Joanna taught a few of the newer women to paint. I was asked to lead a small seminar on how to tell your story without shame. We called it Truth Without Permission. I wrote it on the blackboard in capital letters, then underlined it twice. One night, as the sun dipped low and cast gold across the courtyard, Gloria and I sat under the pines again. She leaned back in her chair, eyes closed. "You think it's over?" she asked. "No," I said, "but it's not hiding anymore." Quote. She opened her eyes and smiled. "Then maybe we've already won." I didn't answer. I just listened to the breeze, to the laughter drifting from the garden, to the small voices inside this once still place, finally rising in full. Not trembling, not afraid, just free. The spring rains came early that year. They didn't rage or crash like the storms of winter, but arrived soft and steady, soaking the garden beds and coating the old brick walkways in a glassy sheen. Every morning the pines stood glistening, green and solemn, as though they too were learning how to feel again. Inside Eloise's house, a new rhythm was forming, not the rigid order of the past, but something looser, more alive. There were still schedules, yes meals at regular times, medications checked, rooms cleaned, but in between, something different had taken root: freedom. Women drifted through rooms without fear of correction. They stopped in hallways to talk, or simply to sit. There was laughter, the kind that starts slow, unsure of itself, and then surprises you with how natural it sounds. I hadn't heard laughter like that in years. One morning, while sorting through the old storage closet at the end of the East Wing, I found a dusty box labeled Archives. Most of it was unsalvageable faded pamphlets, broken clocks, medical manuals from decades past, but tucked between two crumbling folders was a single photograph. It showed a group of women standing in front of the original pine sign, taken long before the building was what it became. The edges were yellowed, but the faces were clear. In the middle, eyes bright and posture upright, stood Sister Constance. I brought the photo to Daniel, who now visited twice a week to assist with the transition. "She was the first," I said. He turned the photo slowly in his hands. "She was the seed. We should hang this," I added. "Not to glorify the past, to remind us how truth sometimes starts small." Quote. He nodded, and by the end of the day, it hung just inside the entry hall, beneath a simple brass plaque, in memory of those who stayed silent and those who dared not to. The following Sunday, we held our first open house. Families were invited, community members, former staff who had stood on the right side of history, even a handful of women who had once lived here but now lived elsewhere, some with children, others with partners or on their own. The dining hall was filled with voices, chairs pulled close, hands reaching across tables. I saw Joanna standing in the corner, painting small watercolors to give as gifts. Celia was helping two new arrivals plant herbs in window boxes. Gloria had set up a display of letters and notes we'd received from survivors across the country. People moved slowly through the house that day, reading, touching, remembering. And then, late in the afternoon, someone I hadn't expected appeared. It was Thomas, my son. He stood in the doorway of the greenhouse, holding his hat in his hand like a child returning to school after running away. He was thinner than I remembered, older around the eyes. We looked at each other for a long time. "I read about this place," he said. "Didn't realize you were part of it." I nodded. "I thought you needed help," he added, his voice quiet. "That I was helping." "So did I said. "Until I learned what help isn't." He lowered his eyes. "I'm sorry." The words landed gently. Not everything healed in a single sentence. But sometimes it's enough to start. I invited him in. We walked through the garden, past rows of blooming lavender, past benches that had once borne silent tears and now held open books and shared secrets. He stopped by the chapel, now emptied of old pews and filled with light. Inside, new wooden chairs sat in a circle, a space for conversation, for truth. "I didn't know how much you lost," he said. "And I didn't know how much I still had," I replied. He stayed until sundown. Before he left, he hugged me, not out of duty but something deeper. And when he drove away, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt seen. The next day, we held our first storytelling circle. No agenda, no camera, just voices. I spoke first, but only briefly. Then came Harriet, who told of a sister she hadn't seen since the summer of '64. Then Marie, who read from her journal a single paragraph she'd rewritten every day for 5 years, until it stopped hurting. When the circle ended, no one moved right away. We just sat there, together. Later that week, Gloria came to me with an idea. "We should publish something," she said. "Not just a report or an article, a book, in our own words." I hesitated. "Will anyone read it?" "That's not the point," she said. "We write it so we never forget. We write it for the ones who couldn't." We called it The House That Spoke. Each chapter was told by a different voice. Some were vivid, others halting, fragmented. Some used full names, others initials. But all of them were real. By spring's end, we had enough to fill a small volume. We sent copies to libraries, advocacy groups, legal organizations. And then we waited. But not in silence. We continued to teach. To plant. To cook together. To laugh in ways that sometimes startled us. We watched movies in the evenings, and no one flinched when the volume rose. We danced, even when no music played. One morning, while cleaning out the final boxes in the old storage room, Celia found a single name tag buried beneath a pile of broken clipboards. It read, E.M. Clayton, Eloise. We added it to the memorial wall in the hallway. Not as a relic, but as a promise. She had stayed. She had warned. She had endured. Now we would carry her forward. In every word, every step, every name spoken aloud. Because Eloise's house wasn't just a place. It was a voice. And we had only just begun to use it. By midsummer, the vines had reached the rooftop gutters, and the garden behind Eloise's house had grown wild in the best possible way. Herbs spilled from their planters, tomato vines wrapped around old trellises, and sunflowers towered over the stone path like quiet sentinels. What once felt like the edges of a cage now felt more like a sanctuary, one shaped by many hands, tended with purpose and care. Inside, the air was different too. There were new routines now. Morning yoga, quiet reading circles, storytelling workshops in the chapel. Not required, not tracked, just offered. The house no longer dictated, it invited. But even as peace settled into our bones, we knew healing was not the end of the story. Because story, especially the hard ones, do not end with survival. They continue in what we choose to do with the pain, whether we hold it, whether we pass it forward as warning or offering. One July afternoon, a letter arrived. It was thick, official. The return address read, United States Senate Committee on Social Justice and Human Welfare. I unfolded it with careful fingers. Inside was an invitation. They wanted me to testify, not just for Eloise's house, but on behalf of all survivors of institutional mistreatment, women, elders, the voiceless tucked into the corners of care. Daniel called that evening. They've read your book, he said, and they've read the reports, but they want more than words on paper. They want presence. Would you be willing? I didn't answer immediately. I thought of the long gray room where senators sit behind nameplates and microphones, their voices echoing into cameras. I thought of all the women who once believed no one would ever listen, "I'll go," I said, "but I won't speak alone." So I asked Gloria, and Joanna, and Celia. Each said yes without hesitation. A week later, we traveled by train, 4 women in cardigans and quiet strength, sitting shoulder to shoulder in a row of worn blue seats. None of us spoke much during the ride. The rhythm of the tracks was enough. I watched the fields pass outside the window and thought about time, how it folds, how it waits, how it sometimes circles back with purpose. When we arrived, we were greeted by a young staffer named Anna. She wore round glasses and carried a folder tucked tightly under one arm. "I read your book," she said, shaking my hand. "Thank you for not giving up." She led us through the Capitol's halls, marble, echoing, filled with a kind of reverent hush. When we entered the chamber, I felt a strange stillness inside me. Not fear, not even nerves, just a quiet steadiness, like the hush before a bell rings. The room filled slowly. Reporters, staffers, a few familiar faces from the hearings that had sparked national conversation months earlier, and then the chairperson entered and gave a nod. The hearing began. One by one, we spoke. Celia went first. She told them about the months she spent behind a locked door, her name erased from the registry, her cries labeled confusion. Joanna spoke next. Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger as she described how art had saved her, how memory sometimes needs color to survive. Gloria's turn followed. She spoke with the grace of someone used to being overlooked and now utterly unwilling to be invisible again. When my turn came, I rose slowly and stepped to the microphone. "I was placed in a care facility by family who believed they were doing the right thing," I began. What followed was not care. It was containment. Silence disguised as service. I do not speak today as a victim but as a witness. And I ask you not to pity us, but to act. Because systems like the one we endured don't start with cruelty. They start with convenience. I let the words settle, and then added, "But healing isn't just about punishment. It's about restoration. About building places where women can live with dignity, where stories are honored, not hidden." By the end of our testimonies, no one clapped. That wasn't the space for it. But something had shifted in the room. You could feel it in the way the senators sat straighter, in how the reporters stopped scribbling and just listened. Afterward, as we stood outside on the Capitol steps beneath a sky as wide as anything I'd ever seen, Anna approached us again. "They want to move forward," she said. "New oversight, federal reform, grants for survivor-led centers." Gloria raised her brow. "So it begins." Anna smiled. "Because of you." We returned to Eloise's house that weekend. When we arrived, the sun was setting behind the pines, casting long shadows across the front lawn. The girls, yes, we still called them that. Even the ones in their 70s gathered on the porch to welcome us home. We were greeted not with applause, but with open arms. As we walked through the doorway, I looked up at the sign once more. Eloise's house. A name no longer whispered. Now carved. Known. Inside, the hallway buzzed with voices and music drifting from the dining room. Celia turned to me. "You think they'll keep listening?" "I don't know," I said, "but we'll keep speaking." That night, I returned to my journal and wrote a single line. Justice doesn't erase the past, but it makes room for a future we can choose. And I knew. We weren't finished. Not even close. By early autumn, the air around Eloise's house began to change once again. It wasn't just the wind slipping colder through the trees, or the gold creeping into the leaves. It was quieter than that, deeper, as if the walls themselves were beginning to exhale after holding their breath for too many years. There was less tension in the corridors now. Laughter came more freely, not just in moments of joy but even in grief, as if sorrow, once named, had finally made room for humor again. The women walked taller. They chose their clothes with more care. Some wore lipstick. Others sang softly as they folded laundry. Small revolutions. And still, the letters kept coming. From Maine, from Arizona, from forgotten towns scattered across the Midwest. Daughters writing about mothers they'd never truly known. Sisters who had been separated by silence and now found one another in words. Survivors we'd never met who recognized themselves in our voices. One letter came addressed to me, but it carried no return address. The handwriting was trembling, almost childlike, each letter pressed deep into the page. I was there too, in the room where the lights never turned off. I thought no one would remember. Thank you for remembering us. I kept that one in the drawer by my bed. not for proof, but for prayer. We had begun documenting the testimonies officially this time. Joanna and I worked together in the chapel-turned-story room, recording interviews with women who were ready to speak aloud what they had carried for decades. Some whispered, some wept, some laughed in disbelief, as the words finally left their mouths. Each story became part of an archive that would live on, not hidden in file cabinets but open to anyone who needed to understand. One afternoon, Verna returned. She had left after the hearings, stepping away for rest and reflection. Now she walked through the front doors of Eloise's house with a satchel over her shoulder and a smile that held both pride and ache. "I had to see it," she said, hugging me. "I had to see it become what we imagined." We sat under the porch awning, watching a group of women harvesting herbs from the garden. Verna ran her hand along the edge of the railing. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "But do you ever wonder what happens next?" I nodded. "Every day." She glanced at me. And I keep going anyway." She laughed. "That's the answer, isn't it?" That evening we held a small ceremony in the chapel. Not for loss, but for beginning. We had decided to start a mentorship program pairing survivors from Eloise's house with women at risk, newly released from other institutions, or simply in need of a place to rest. We called it Echo Sisters. Each woman who volunteered would carry her story into someone else's silence and stand there not as a rescuer, but as proof that healing isn't just possible, it's contagious. Gloria stood at the front of the chapel to speak. "This house was once full of locked doors," she said. "Now, we open them. For others. For ourselves. We don't ask anyone to forget. We just ask them to come in." We lit candlestone for each woman who had come through these walls and found her voice. I watched the flames flicker and thought how strange it was that light could feel so heavy, so rooted, like it had been waiting in the walls all along, needing only a match. Later that week, Daniel stopped by with news. "They've approved the funding," he said. "Your mentorship model is going national. 5 more houses, first in Oregon, then Michigan, Texas, Vermont, and Florida." Joanna gasped. Gloria smiled, but said nothing, just took a deep breath, as if holding the moment in her lungs. "They want you to name the new ones," Daniel added. We didn't need to think long. Each house would carry the name of a woman who once stood inside these walls and dared to speak. The Harriet Center, the Joanna Grace Home, Eloise South, Celia's Shelter, Constance House. I wrote the names down on a yellow notepad that had once been used for medication tracking. The pen left a soft dent in the paper, as if the names were pressing into time. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, I walked through the halls alone. I stopped at the room that used to be mine. It looked different now, painted a soft green, the window open to let in the breeze. A woman named Ramona lived there now. She had arrived 2 weeks ago and still flinched when someone knocked on her door. But that morning, I'd seen her sipping tea on the porch beside Celia, their shoulders touching like sisters. I moved on, passing the old records room, now converted into a library. Shelves full of memoirs, poetry, psychology texts, letters from readers. On the far wall hung a framed quote, "What breaks us is not the silence, but the belief that no one will ever hear." Underneath, a signature, E.M. Clayton. I touched the frame gently. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, and I remembered the sound of keys in the hallway, the press of shoes on concrete steps, the breath I once held in my chest, afraid of being seen. Now, I stood in the open, not afraid, not invisible. And I knew the story would go on, not just because we told it, but because others would too. October brought with it the kind of cold that doesn't ask permission. It arrived on the backs of clouds, curled into the corners of windows, settled into the joints of our oldest residents. But no one complained, not anymore. We had grown used to change not just in weather but in ourselves. Eloise's house carried it too. The warmth in the dining hall, the quiet shuffle of slippers in the morning, the slow blooming of soft, steady trust. Even the building seemed to lean into it, walls breathing easier, rooms echoing less. By mid-month, the first invitations for the Door in the Pines exhibition had been mailed out. Libraries across the state responded, asking for tour dates. Universities offered to host panels. Local news stations promised coverage. The story had spread far beyond our garden gate. But we knew better than to believe change was ever finished. It was during one of our evening gatherings, just as we'd finished arranging chairs for another round of story circles, that Gloria returned from the post office with a package. She held it close, her brow furrowed, her fingers curled tightly around the edges. "There's no return address," she said. We opened it together. Inside, wrapped in a worn linen napkin, was a stack of photographs, black and white. Most were bent at the corners, some faded, but all unmistakably real. Women, dozens of them. Some standing in front of buildings like ours, others seated in rows along long halls with polished floors. No names, no captions, only eyes that stared back with a quiet that looked too familiar. At the bottom of the stack was a note, typed on thin, yellowed paper. These were found in the attic of my mother's home after her passing. She never spoke of her time in care, but I believe these belong to a history that shouldn't be forgotten. Gloria looked at me. "We have to include them. Everyone," I said. We spent that week cataloging each photograph, scanning them carefully, preserving them. For the exhibition, for the archive, for the truth that never had a place before. Each night after the rest of the house had gone quiet, I studied the faces. One in particular stayed with me. A woman young, maybe in her 20s, hair parted in the middle, dress too large, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. But something in her eyes' resistance maybe looked familiar. Not because I knew her, but because I had once looked that way myself. One morning, Celia approached me in the chapel with a small wooden box in her hands. "I've been holding on to this since I left St. Mildred's," she said softly. St. Mildred's. Another place. Another silence. Inside the box were pages handwritten, folded, some stained with time, letters, journal entries, bits of songs. "I took them," she said, her voice tight. "I didn't ask. I just couldn't leave them behind." "Whose are they?" "Women who never got to leave." I looked at her. "Are you ready to share them?" She nodded once. So we began again, this time with stories not our own but no less sacred. We created a wall in the main hall, beneath the mural Joanna had painted. We called it The Others. Each woman's story was placed inside a glass frame, no long captions, just a name, or an initial, and a line from her writing. I still sing when no one listens. Please remember I was here. I didn't dream it. It happened. Visitors stopped in front of that wall longer than anywhere else. Some wept. Others placed their palms against the glass like they were trying to reach back across time. And we let them. That was the point. By the end of October, Eloise House had begun training other houses, those built on the model we'd created. Gloria traveled to Michigan to help open Celia's shelter. Joanna sent artwork to Constance House in Vermont. I received a letter from the director of Harriet Center in Texas, asking if we'd consider sending a speaker to their first community dinner. They had 16 residents already. All women. All former patients. I folded the letter carefully and placed it beside my journal. Later that evening, as I walked the familiar path between the back garden and the chapel, I heard someone calling my name. It was May. She stood beneath the arbor, her hair wrapped in a scarf, cheeks pink from the wind. "I read one of the old letters," she said, "from the wall. The one that ends with, 'I wasn't crazy. I was just loud.'" I nodded. "I remember that one. I think I'm ready to write mine now," she said. I placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You don't have to share it." "I know," she said, "but I think someone like me might need it someday." That night, May sat in the circle for the first time. She cleared her throat once and began. "My name is May. I was locked away for being angry. I was angry because they lied to me, about who I was, about what I was worth, about what it meant to be healed." No one interrupted. She kept going. "They told me I had a temper, that I needed correction, but all I wanted was to be believed." She paused then, eyes wet but steady. "And now I am." Silence wrapped the room. Not the cold silence of before. A warm one, like shelter. The kind that holds. When she finished, we didn't applaud. We simply breathed with her. Afterward, May handed me a folded paper. On the outside, she had written, "For the woman who will come next." And I knew. Our work wasn't done, but it was working. The first frost came quietly, blanketing the lawn in silver by morning. From the window of the upstairs landing, the garden looked like it had been dusted with ash. Not mournful, just still. Resting, the way things do when they've given all they can for a season. Inside Eloise's house, that same stillness settled gently. After months of action, of growth, of loud remembering, there was a softness now. Not silence, but a kind of sacred pause, a breath held not in fear, but in reverence. In the chapel, May's letter had been framed and added to the wall. Beneath her words, someone had placed a dried sprig of lavender tied with a thin piece of twine. No one admitted to doing it, but we all noticed. Little gestures like that had become common here, flowers left by doorways, cookies baked in the middle of the night, gentle knocks from one room to another just to say, "You're not alone." That morning, Gloria and I sat in the front sunroom with mugs of strong tea, watching the mist rise from the grass. She had a notebook in her lap, as always, but her pen had stopped moving. "You ever wonder," she said, not looking up, "what would have happened if we hadn't fought back?" I didn't answer right away. "I don't think we'd be gone," I said finally. "But we wouldn't be here, not like this, not whole." She nodded. Survival is different from being free. Quote. The mail arrived just before lunch, and with it, a large manila envelope marked from the Department of Education. Inside was a proposal, a national curriculum module using Eloise House's story as a teaching case for ethics, social work, and trauma-informed practice. I held the papers in my hands like they were made of glass. "They want to teach us," I said aloud, stunned. Joanna, who was setting out chairs nearby, looked over and smiled. "Good, let them." Quote. That same afternoon, 2 volunteers from Constance House arrived to observe how we ran our circles and mentorships. One was a young woman named Tess, barely in her 30s, with quick eyes and the kind of quiet that wasn't shyness, but restraint. During our tour, she paused in the mural room and stared for a long time at the painted figure reaching toward the open door. "I know that feeling," she said softly. "That ache to leave, but not knowing what's out there." "Quay. It doesn't go away," I replied. "But eventually you learn to walk anyway." Later, during the evening meal, Tess sat next to Celia, and I watched them speak in slow waves. Not urgent, not forced, just story passing hand to hand, like water in a cupped palm. That night, I found myself walking the garden paths alone, bundled in my coat, the cold biting gently at my cheeks. The stars above were sharp and bright, the way they only are in late autumn. As I reached the west fence, I heard a voice behind me. "Still wandering?" It was Daniel. He stepped into the moonlight, hands in his pockets, face lined with the day's work. "Always," I said. He stood beside me for a while without speaking. We'd grown used to silence. The good kind, the kind that says more than most words. "There's talk," he said eventually, "at the state level, about establishing a national survivors network. Survivor-led, survivor-built. They want your input." Quote. I didn't ask why me. Not anymore. Instead I said, "Only if it's real. No committees with pretty titles and no teeth." He smiled. "I told them you'd say that." Back inside, I passed the mural again, now softly lit by evening lamps, and I noticed something new. Someone had painted a tiny figure just beyond the open door, barely visible, tucked in the background. A woman, walking toward the light with a child's hand in hers. I stopped. A message, maybe, or a reminder, that what we built here wasn't just for us. The next day, Tess asked to speak during the circle. Her voice was steady. I used to believe that healing meant erasing what happened, that if I could just forget it, bury it deep enough, it wouldn't define me. But here, I've learned something else. That healing isn't forgetting. It's remembering without losing yourself. She paused, then added, "I think maybe this house taught me how to be a witness without staying wounded." Quote. We were quiet after she finished, not out of discomfort, but out of awe. I looked around the room at faces both new and familiar, at chairs once filled with fear now occupied by women who smiled when they spoke. And I thought of how far we had come, from a name whispered behind closed doors, to a house that opened them, from silence that was enforced, to silence that was chosen. That evening I returned to my journal and wrote, "The seasons change, the work continues, the doors remain open, and we remain. Not untouched, but unbroken." The first snow came without warning. It wasn't in the forecast. There had been no frost the night before, no clouds crowding the horizon at dawn, just a sky like brushed silver. And then, sometime before breakfast, flakes began to fall soft and soundless, clinging to the windows in delicate veils. Inside Eloise's house, everything paused for a moment. Conversations stopped. Coffee mugs sat forgotten. We stood at windows, at doorways, watching the snow blanket the garden, the roof, the gravel paths. For many of us, it was the first snowfall we'd seen freely in years. Celia placed a hand on the glass beside me. "When I was little," she said, "I used to think snow made the world forget. All the lines, all the mess. It just covered it." I nodded. "But it doesn't erase anything." "No," she whispered, "but it lets you see it fresh." That day, the energy in the house shifted. The usual rhythm softened. Story circle became story soup. Everyone gathered in the dining room, bringing memories and laughter like old recipes. Harriet told a tale about sneaking out of her dormitory during a snowstorm in 1963 to see the Beatles play a club in D.C. Joanna sketched on napkins, passing her drawings around like postcards. Even May sung a quiet, warbling melody that none of us recognized but all of us felt. After lunch, Gloria and I went through the donation closet, sorting winter coats and scarves for the new residents expected next week. Most were arriving from a recently closed institution in northern Ohio. Rumors said the place had been shut down overnight, doors locked, staff scattered. But the women were being brought here, to Eloise's house, not as transfers, but as guests. "They'll be shell-shocked," Gloria said gently, folding a wool sweater. "Like we were." Quote, "But they'll land on something solid," I answered. "That's more than most of us had." We spent the afternoon readying rooms, fluffing pillows, warming blankets, placing welcome letters on each bedside table. Verna returned that evening, arms full of extra quilts she'd sewn herself during her time away. "I always liked winter," she said, placing a folded quilt at the foot of each bed. "It makes you gather closer." By nightfall, the snow had thickened. The porch was layered in white, and the wind had picked up just enough to sing softly at the edges of the windows. We gathered in the chapel, not for a service but for light. Joanna had placed candles in jars along the windowsills, their flickering glow casting long shadows against the mural on the wall. Everyone brought something to read: letters, journal entries, favorite lines from books. Gloria shared a poem she'd written that morning. "Let the snow come. Let it cover what we've carried." Not to hide it, but to cool the burn. When it was my turn, I pulled a page from my journal. "I wrote this a few nights ago," I began, after receiving a letter from the director of one of the new houses. It was short, just 6 words. "How did you know what to build?" I paused, feeling the hush around me. "My answer," I read, "was simple. We built what we were denied, a place where doors open, where voices echo, where nobody disappears." Claude. Afterward, May stepped forward with a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She opened it to reveal dozens of folded papers, each marked with a first name and a date. "These are from the women who came before me," she said. "I carried their words for years, didn't know what to do with them, but I think, maybe now, they belong here." One by one, we unfolded them and read them aloud. Some were only fragments. "I dream of walking again. I was not insane. I was unheard." Quote, "Please, if anyone ever finds this, remember me." By the end, the chapel was filled with something sacred, not sorrow, not even grief. It felt more like communion, not in the religious sense, but the human one. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I stayed behind, watching the candles burn low. I thought of the women who were coming soon, tired, frightened, unsure if this place would be different. I thought of all the hands that had shaped this house: Eloise, Sister Constance, Rose, Verna, Gloria, and all the ones who still would. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering everything, not to erase, but to remind us that beneath the cold, something waits, and it is not lost. It is only resting. The women from Ohio arrived just after sunrise. Their bus rolled in slowly, headlights cutting through the thinning snow, tires crunching over gravel still iced at the edges. We were waiting: Verna, Gloria, Joanna, May, and is standing on the front porch bundled in coats and scarves, mugs of tea cooling in our hands. They stepped off one by one. Some moved with hesitation, others with practiced numbness. A few clutched paper bags or pillowcases tied with rope, their belongings meager and tightly held. No one spoke at first, only the soft gusts of winter wind and the creak of the front steps beneath cautious feet. I stepped forward, offering a simple greeting. "Welcome to Eloise house. You're safe here, truly." One woman mid-40s, hollow-eyed, stared at me as if waiting for the lie to follow. When none came, she nodded once, barely. It was enough. We led them inside, guiding them down warm hallways, pointing out bathrooms and gathering rooms, offering soft blankets and quiet rooms. No questions, no intake forms, only kindness, patient and steady. Later, as I helped one of the younger women, Lena, unpack the few clothes she had into the small chest beside her bed, she turned to me. "Is there a curfew?" she asked. "Number. Do I need to ask before I leave my room?" I shook my head. "You don't need permission to exist here." She looked away quickly, blinking hard. The adjustment was slow. That first week, many stayed in their rooms, emerging only for meals or to sit silently in the corners of shared spaces. But we'd been through this before. We knew how long silence could take to thaw. We left them letters, slipped warm cookies onto windowsills, invited without expectation. On the 5th evening, I found a note slipped under the door to my room. It read, "I heard someone laugh tonight. I forgot what that sounded like. Thank you." No name, just the echo of something beginning again. We added a new evening practice to the routine light hour. At 7 p.m., we dimmed the main hall lights and turned on soft lamps in each corner. Women gathered wherever they liked, some with books, others just to sit in stillness. There was no agenda, only presence. During one of these evenings, Lena approached the small upright piano in the sunroom. She touched the keys with the tip of one finger, uncertain. Then she began to play. A slow, hesitant melody, something unfinished but full of memory. The room grew still, each woman turning toward the sound like moths to flame. When she stopped, the silence held. Then gentle applause, not loud, not forced, just enough to say, "We heard you." She smiled, barely, and whispered, "I used to play for myself. Then they made me stop." "No one will stop you here," Gloria said softly. "Not ever again." Quote. By the following week, the newer residents had begun joining the story circles. Not all spoke, but many listened. One, a woman named Ruth, brought a worn journal with her every evening. She didn't read from it. Not yet. But she held it tightly, her thumb running along the edges like a ritual. On the 9th night, she opened it and read a line. "I never thought I'd see the moon without a curtain again." We let the silence after that linger. Some truths are best absorbed slowly. The next morning, Daniel returned, this time with a social worker named Shira, who had helped coordinate the emergency transition from the closed Ohio facility. She had kind eyes and a clipboard she didn't look at once. After touring the grounds, she met with Gloria and me in the greenhouse. "You've done something rare here," Shira said. "They trust you." "We didn't ask for it," Gloria replied. "We just didn't break it." Shira smiled. "Still, it matters. They're asking if we can use Eloise house as a model for other emergency shelters, not just for women, but for anyone leaving failed care systems." I looked around the greenhouse's sunlight filtering through the glass. A small rosemary bush blooming unexpectedly in the corner. "Of course," I said. "That's always been the hope." That night, I returned to my journal, but instead of writing to remember, I wrote to offer. A letter. Short, simple. One I could leave in the common room, on the table near the door where newcomers always paused. To the one who just arrived, "I don't know your story yet, but I know it matters. Take your time. The world here doesn't ask you to be anything but honest. When you're ready, we'll be listening." I signed it only with a small drawing of a door slightly open. The next morning, the note was gone. In its place was a folded paper with 3 words, scribbled in pencil. "I'm still here." I held it in my hand for a long while, letting the weight of those words settle in my chest. Still here, despite everything. Still. And that, I thought, might be the truest kind of healing. Not forgetting. Not fixing. But being allowed to remain. The first Sunday of December arrived, wrapped in soft gray clouds and a hush that felt older than winter itself. The snow from the earlier storm had melted, leaving the garden bare again, its soil dark and patient, waiting for what might come next. Inside, the warmth of Eloise's house gathered around shared pots of stew and the quiet rustle of slippers on worn wood floors. New and old residents sat side by side, no longer separated by fear or formality. There was something deeply human in the way their bodies leaned gently toward one another during conversation, like trees growing closer over time. At breakfast, Ruth, who had once spoken only through a journal, set down her spoon and said, "I'd like to host the circle tonight." The table stilled. Then May reached out and touched her wrist. "You'd be perfect." That evening, we arranged the chairs in the chapel a little differently. Ruth asked for a smaller circle. Fewer voices. More quiet. We turned off the overhead lights and lit beeswax candles, their flames steady and warm against the dark wood. When everyone was seated, Ruth opened her notebook. Her voice was soft but sure. "I used to think stories had to be told all at once, that you had to open everything, bare all your wounds, or else it didn't count. But healing doesn't ask for that. Sometimes it only asks you to stay long enough for someone else to recognize themselves in your silence." She looked up, eyes bright. "Tonight, I don't want us to tell what happened. I want us to tell what came after." One by one, the women began to share. "I started sleeping through the night again," said Lena. "I planted tulip bulbs. I don't know if they'll bloom, but I planted them," said Joanna. "I made a phone call to my sister," said Gloria. "And when she asked where I was, I told her the truth." Ruth closed her eyes, breathed in deeply, then said, "I forgave myself for believing what they told me." Quote, "A hush followed, not from discomfort, but reverence. After the circle, I found myself alone in the mural room. The figure reaching for the open door seemed to shimmer under the candlelight. I studied the painted trees, the wind-blown dresses, and the childlike figure tucked in the background. I hadn't noticed before, but someone had added tiny stars in the upper corner of the sky. They glowed faintly, like they'd always been there, just waiting to be seen. A voice broke my focus. "Martha?" It was Daniel. He stood at the door, papers in hand, his expression unreadable. "They've finalized it," he said. I rose slowly. "Finalized what?" "The federal initiative. It's passed. The Survivor-Defined Housing Act. Funding, protection standards, licensing reforms, and more than that." He stepped into the room, his eyes shining. "They want Eloise's house to serve as the national training site for every center that follows." I sat back down, not because I was overwhelmed, but because my knees, after all these years, still remembered what it felt like to kneel when there was nothing left to pray for. And now, there was everything. The next morning we held a house meeting. Everyone, even those who preferred corners and quiet, gathered in the common room. Daniel stood before them, reading aloud the letter from the Department of Health and Human Services. There was no applause, just long, steady breathing. Until someone, Tess, from the second-floor west wing, stood up and said, "I want to help teach." Then Ruth added, "So do I." Gloria smiled, her hand resting over her heart. That afternoon we gathered in the kitchen to bake. For no reason, really. Just the old comfort of warm ovens and soft dough. Lena mixed cinnamon into the batter. May rolled dough with quiet focus. Verna walked in mid-process and immediately tied on an apron. "It smells like home," she said. "Which one?" Gloria teased. "This one," Verna replied without missing a beat. As we waited for the loaves to rise, I pulled out the small box we kept on the top pantry shelf, the one filled with folded notes from past residents. Not their pain, their victories. I read one aloud. "I brushed my hair today. Not because I had to, but because I liked how it felt." Joanna read another. "I made it through a whole hour without flinching." And a third. "I started again." Quote, "By the time the bread was done, the kitchen had filled with voice not loud, but layered, soft and certain. We ate together at the long table, butter melting on fresh slices, jam passed hand to hand. Later that evening I returned to my journal. The same one I'd started on the night the locks still clicked too loudly and the shadows in the hallway still looked like watchers. Now, its pages were almost full. I wrote slowly. There was a time I believed survival was the last chapter, that once you escaped, once you named the truth, the story ended. But now I know, the real story begins when you stay, when you choose to build, When you plant things knowing you may not see them bloom. I closed the journal. Outside, the wind had picked up again. The pines swayed gently in the dark. I could almost hear them, like voices low with memory, reminding me that some roots hold, even through the hardest winters. Especially then. By mid-December, snow had returned steadier this time, blanketing the fields with a quiet finality that seemed to say, "Rest now. You've earned it." The garden lay hidden beneath white. The mural room glowed with soft light. Inside Eloise's house, time moved more slowly, not from delay, but from deliberate care. There was a calmness to everything, not because things had become easy, but because the struggle no longer defined every breath. The house had become a rhythm, a heartbeat of its own. Each resident had woven their presence into it not as a visitor, but as a voice that mattered. That morning, Ruth stood beside the mail cart, sorting envelopes with gentle precision. She'd appointed herself the house's unofficial postmistress, and no one had the heart or the authority to question it. Her system was elegant, incoming letters placed in a woven basket beside the fireplace, outgoing messages tucked in a tin box labeled "Stories in Motion." "We have a new one," she said, holding up a thick white envelope. "Return address says Michigan, from Celia's shelter." Gloria took it with care. "Probably their first newsletter," she said. "They said they'd send updates." She opened it right there on the sofa, the rest of us leaning in. Inside was a hand-drawn postcard of a treehouse rising out of snow-covered pines. On the back, in Celia's distinct cursive, "We've started building more than beds. We're building belief. Thought you'd want to know." Below that, a second note. "Also, someone painted your mural on our dining room wall. Hope that's okay." Joanna let out a laugh. "Tell them it's not okay, it's perfect." Gloria nodded. "We should respond." "Let's do more than respond," I said. "Let's visit." That single idea took root faster than we expected. By week's end, we'd arranged a small group to make the journey to Michigan. Gloria, Joanna, Tess, and May, along with Shira, who'd now become our formal liaison with the expansion program. They would host workshops, help refine the mentorship framework, and deliver the first copies of The Door in the Pines companion Guidea resource we'd spent months building, filled with lessons learned and voices collected. "Will you come too?" Joanna asked as we packed the final supplies. I hesitated, glancing out the window at the trees dusted in white. "No," I said gently. "This time, I think I'm meant to stay." The day they left, we gathered on the porch with thermoses of cider and scarves tight around our necks. The van idled in the driveway, its windows already fogging from the cold. Tess leaned in and hugged me. "We'll bring back stories." "And photos," said May, pressing a mittened hand against mine. "And cinnamon rolls, if Celia still bakes." Quote. Then they were off, their taillights disappearing into the trees. Inside, the house felt momentarily still, not empty, just expectant. I walked the halls alone that afternoon, pausing at doorways where laughter had recently lived. In the library, Lena was curled up in a chair with a book. She looked up and smiled, not to ask anything, just to share the quiet. In the chapel, Ruth was rethreading the candles, trimming the wicks. She hummed as she worked, a tune I couldn't place. "Everything feels different again," I said. She nodded. Growth always does. That evening the snow picked up. Wind rattled the porch railings. The power flickered once, then steadied. We gathered in the main room, those of us who'd stayed behind, and took turns reading from a pile of donated books. One was a memoir by a woman who had grown up in a boarding school and spent her adult life searching for the version of herself that hadn't been erased. After the final page, no one spoke right away. Then Lena said, "I used to think I had to start over, become someone new, but maybe it's about returning to who I was before they told me who I wasn't." That stayed with me all night. Later, in my room, I sat beside the window and opened my journal. I ran my fingers over the last few entries, then turned to a fresh page. There's a stillness that comes, not from absence, but from arrival. When the noise settles, when the questions find their place, it's not the end. It's the breath before the next beginning. The next morning, the van returned. They arrived in a swirl of snow and new energy, cheeks pink, arms full of things, handwritten cards, jars of honey, scarves made by women we'd never met but who somehow already knew us. They painted the mural, Joanna said again, showing a photo. But they added something, a bridge between the trees. Gloria smiled. A way forward. Quote, Celia sends love, Tess added. And she says the cinnamon rolls didn't survive the drive. We laughed, even as we mourned the loss. After unpacking, we gathered in the chapel for a debrief. Shira stood in front, holding a folder. There are now 6 centers, she said, with 2 more in early stages, and they're all using the Eloise model. Someone asked, What's the model? Shira paused, then said simply, Listening, without rushing, without needing to fix, just hearing what was silenced, and choosing not to look away. That night, we placed a new candle on the mural room windowsill, unlit, for now, waiting. A symbol of the next house, the next voice, the next story waiting to be received. Outside, snow continued to fall. And inside, we were ready to receive it. The days leading up to Christmas passed in a slow golden drift. Snow softened every edge of the outside world, blanketing the garden paths and weighing the pine branches until they bowed under the hush of winter. Inside, Eloise's house breathed in rhythm with the season warmth radiating from tea kettles and shared songs, from whispered memories and the rustle of paper snowflakes taped to the chapel windows. This was our first real holiday together, not the kind wrapped in tinsel or forced cheer, but something quieter, a reclaiming. Most of us had spent years pretending to celebrate in places where music was mandatory and joy was monitored. Here, no one had to smile unless they meant it. Verna organized a potluck. No rules, she said. Bring what comforts you, even if it's toast with jam. And they did. A dozen small dishes filled the dining table that night. Rice porridge, peanut brittle, a single apple pie, slices of pickled beet, bread so warm it steamed in the air. May had spent all morning writing name cards for the table, each one tucked beside a plate with a tiny pressed flower. At the center stood a new candle, taller than the rest, its glass etched with the words, Still here, still home. When we sat to eat, no one said grace. But Lena raised her cup of cider and said, To everyone who made it out, and everyone who never got the chance. We drank to that. Later, in the chapel, we gathered for what Ruth called the slowest gift exchange in history. Each woman had brought something mostly handmade or found, a poem, a painting, a book someone had read 3 times and annotated in the margins. They were placed in a pile in the center, and one by one, we each chose, unwrapped, and shared the reason behind our selection. When it was my turn, I unwrapped a bundle wrapped in faded linen. Inside was a small tin box, the kind used for buttons or thread. I opened it slowly. It was filled with notes. Dozens of them. Each folded tight, labeled only with a name and a year. On top was a card. These were the first names I remembered after leaving. I wrote them down so I wouldn't forget. I'm giving them to you now because I know you won't let them disappear. No signature, but I recognized the handwriting. May. I closed the lid gently and placed my hand on top. We'll add them to the wall, I said. Everyone. That night, after everyone had drifted off to bed, I sat in the library with a single candle lit beside me. Snow fell steady outside, muffling every sound. In my lap rested the tin box. I unfolded one of the notes. Camille, 1978. She made me laugh on days I forgot how. I read another. Aline, 1982. Played piano even when they told her she wasn't allowed. Har. Each one was a memory rescued from silence. Not just names, but sparks, glimpses of defiance, of care, of presence in a world that once insisted they didn't matter. I copied each one into my journal, my handwriting slow and deliberate. As I finished the last, I paused, then added one more. May, 2023, gave us a way to remember. Outside, a breeze stirred through the trees, brushing the windows with a soft sigh. I closed the journal and rose to place the tin beside the mural. There, beneath the painted woman reaching toward the door, I set it on a shelf lined with pine cones, tea candles, and other quiet offerings. It belonged there. The next morning was clear and bright. Sunlight reflected off the snow like it had been waiting for just the right moment to return. We served breakfast late, and no one rushed. Afterward, Joanna suggested we take a walk down the wooded path behind the Gardena short trail cleared just that week by the women of the house. They called it the Echo Trail. At the far end it opened to a small clearing with a bench carved from a fallen tree. We bundled in scarves and coats, boots crunching over packed snow, breath rising in little clouds. There was no conversation, just the sound of movement, of birds overhead, of branches creaking in the morning cold. When we reached the clearing, we stood for a while in silence. Then Ruth stepped forward and pulled a folded page from her pocket. "I wrote something," she said, "just for us." She read it aloud, voice steady. "We do not need a monument. We are the proof. Each step forward, each soft voice that rises. In a room once ruled by hush, that is our mark." She folded the paper and placed it on the bench. Gloria smiled, brushing snow from her gloves. "Next year," she said, "we should build something out here, a small shelter, a space to reflect. Not to look back," added May, "but to hold what we've carried." Quote. That afternoon, back inside, we began preparing journals for the incoming class of new residents, 5 women arriving in January, all from a shuttered facility on the southern coast. The pages were blank, each tied with a ribbon, a note inside the front cover. "This story is yours now. Take your time." Later, as dusk folded over the house, I stood once more at the window. Snow had started again light this time, swirling like breath, and I thought of all the names we had gathered, all the doors we had opened, all the voices once silenced that now moved through these rooms like wind in the trees. And I knew. We had not just built a home. We had built a beginning. The last days of the year slipped in almost unnoticed. There was no fanfare, no countdowns, just a quiet deepening of winter. The sky pressed low over the trees. Light left early each evening. The fire in the main room was kept burning longer than usual, not because anyone asked, but because some things are understood without needing words. Inside Eloise's house, the routine carried on. Story circles, soft music in the sunroom, women helping each other lace boots by the front door. There was a calm that had settled, not of resolution but of resilience. Still, I felt something shifting. Not in the house but in me. That morning, I walked the long corridor toward the west wing, where the windows overlooked the grove. Snow fell in delicate flakes, and the branches of the pines trembled as if they remembered something I didn't. I passed by the mural again. The door still glowed golden beneath the arching trees. But perhaps Joanna, perhaps one of the new women had added a new detail. Just beside the door, half hidden in the shadows, a second figure now waited, not walking, watching. Not frightened, just still. The next evening I received a letter. It was slipped beneath my door, folded twice, no envelope. It read, "There are places like Eloise's house springing up across the country, but not everyone wants them to exist. Some call us dangerous, radical. Some want us quiet again." Quote. No signature, but I knew the hand. I'd seen it once in a file in the basement, scribbled in the margin of a disciplinary report. She remembers too much. I folded the letter carefully, slid it into my journal, and said nothing, because I had always known this moment would come. The pushback, the doubt. Truth, after all, does not go unchallenged. The next morning, a black car appeared in the driveway. No one recognized the plates. 2 men stepped out, government, not state. Not smiling. They asked to see the archives. Gloria stalled them. I watched from the hallway, heart steady, breath even. Later that afternoon, Daniel arrived. He looked tired, his voice hoarse. "They're auditing the national initiative. Someone's trying to discredit the model." "On what grounds?" I asked. "Unregulated narratives. Emotional testimony used in place of clinical oversight." I almost laughed. "You mean the truth?" He didn't respond. He didn't need to. We both knew. By evening, the tension in the house had thickened. Women who had once spoken freely now sat with guarded eyes. Even the air felt different, still warm but watchful. And yet, after dinner, May approached me in the hallway. She held out a small notebook, its spine cracked, pages covered in slanted handwriting. "It's mine," she said, "but I want you to keep it. If they come looking, let them read every word. Let them know we weren't broken, just buried." Quote. I took it with both hands, nodding once. That night, I sat in my room and opened the notebook. The first line read, "They thought silence would save them, but we remembered. And memory is louder than shame. I closed the book, turned off the light, and stared into the dark. In the quiet, I heard something. A sound I hadn't heard in years. The soft click of a lock, somewhere down the hall. The next morning Verna was gone. Her room was undisturbed. The bed made, the window slightly open, a note on her pillow. It's not safe for all of us to stay. Not yet. But this place will hold. There was no panic, only breath, only awareness. Later, as snow began to fall again, the women gathered in the mural room. No one spoke of Verna. We didn't need to. We sat in a circle, and we remembered. Not because we feared forgetting, but because remembering is resistance. That night, I stood by the chapel window and watched the wind dance through the pines. I thought of all we had built, of everything that could still be taken. And then I wrote a final line in my journal. Let them come. We are not waiting to be saved. We are the voice that survives the silence. And I left the page open.